I guess the most interesting thing is that was my first overseas expedition, whatever you might call it. It was introduced to me by a friend named George DeMeo. And he somehow had a connection down there. I still well remember the flight down there over the east coast of Mexico, and of course a bit of Central America. And I think it was my first flight like that, so I really quite enjoyed it. When I first got there, we were coming in from the airport, Toncontin, a taxi cab, and it wasn't a taxi cab, it was a private driver. He was from the States and was working down there for whoever I was dealing with for the summer, and he was a rather aggressive young man, and we came up to a corner that had a policeman on a little platform in the middle of the corner, and he kept raising his engine like to the cop. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. Pulled him over and stopped him. He said to me, get your bags and get out of here and get a taxi and get to the hotel, which was my introduction to Honduras. The arrangements had been made for us to do the deal before he came down. And we had a letter from the director of the armed forces to all the local commanders of the local bases, and this letter gave a direction to deliver all your old obsolete firearms to Mr. Steen in Sarco. So we went around from base to base and collected everything and moved it to a central location in Tegucigalpa, where we had to gather and pack it up, study what was there and so forth, which I think I was down there for 6 weeks altogether, if I recall. Gathered all this stuff up and ultimately moved it to the United States. Ironically, I think it was one of the last shipments to come into the United States as an import before the 1968 Gun Control Act. At the time, you could move freight by air in Honduras for 5 cents a pound, so it was the easiest way to get it back. A lot of the guns were in poor condition, and we had to process them. We did a lot of work on them. I had people just, assembling and rebuilding guns forever. A surplus gun that was very expensive was probably around $100 at the time. The only guns that we have left out of that shipment are some Bannerman Springfields. We also got a whole bunch of ammunition, which was really interesting because a lot of it was old ammunition that no longer existed. We brought in, as I recall, I think was about 13,000 guns. And at the time I was functioning out of I think it was a 2,000 square foot building next to the railroad tracks in Sterling. When the stuff came in, every aisle was full. The boiler room was full of guns. Everything was full of guns. All the guns that were shipped up to us were put in crates that were made of Honduran mahogany, which was kind of cool. When we got done with that, I guess I was just perhaps moving into my new house, and we used the wood from mahogany crates to build the flooring in the attic and still have some of the flooring built into the bar in the basement. When I first went to Honduras, I was in the hotel, and the first morning I was up in the restaurant in the top of the hotel having breakfast. And I wanted to use my Spanish. So the waitress came over for breakfast, and I decided I would order in Spanish. So I said, por favor, quiero huevos fritos con zapatos. And she looks at me and she says, ¿Qué dice? What's that mean? And I said, claro, clear, huevos fritos con zapatos. And this went back and forth 3 or 4 times, and finally it dawned on me I had the wrong word. So the last time I said it, I said huevos fritos con potatos. And potatos are potatoes that goes with fried eggs. And zapatos are shoes. And it was one of the exchanges in my life's career that I long remember. It's interesting, this is so many years ago in 1968. So we flew to another town, the name of which I do not remember. The seats in the plane fold up and down, and if they're carrying cargo, the seats are up. If they're carrying people, the seats are down. But anyway, when we got to the town, the airport was just like a big green field, and it was full of cattle. Had to buzz the airport 2 or 3 times to scare the cattle off of the field so the plane could land. Then when we landed, My taxi cab was a rough cart drawn by 2 mules that took us into town as the official taxi into town. Then when we went into the base, the commander wasn't there. He was up in the mountains with his girlfriend for a couple of days, so we had to sit there and sit there and sit there. Finally, when the commander came back, we went to the base, and the commander says, "I don't care what your letter said." He says, "I'm not giving up anything here. I want it all kept here." Kind of the culmination of the story was a trip to a town called La Ceiba on a shallow water bay in the north of Honduras. And it's one of the towns where we went to the base to collect the guns. And we got there, and I think we wound up with, half a dozen, a big sack full of pistols. When we were in La Ceiba, folks there said, "Why don't you go up on the mountain? There's some old cannons up there you might want to take back." I thought about it, and an old cannon in those days was worth a couple $100, and we would have had to hire people to go up on the mountain, bring the cannons down, bring the cannons into small boats because it was a shallow water port, bring them back up to the Tegucigalpa, then ship them down to the main port again to go to the States, and for $200 it just wasn't worth it, so I left. Fast forward about 20 years when they had the huge hurricane in Honduras. The U.S. sent a bunch of paramedics down to Honduras to help the people who were victims of the hurricane. Paramedics wound up in La Ceiba, and the people in La Ceiba said to them, "Why don't you go up on the mountain and have a look at the cannons that Columbus left here off his ship when he visited Honduras?" I have to laugh at it every time I think of it. I could have had Columbus's cannons, but many times the story is better than the happening. Because if I got the cannons, I would have brought them up here, sold them for $200, and that'd be the end of it, because nobody would have ever known they were Columbus's cannons. So, as I said a minute ago, the story is better than the happening.